John Middlekauff, former NFL scout, Three and Out podcast. Let's talk some NFL schedule stuff. And we'll do a half hour on this. I think it's my first take is so I looked at the Niners schedule and I knew it would be easy. And then I watched the way it was laid out. And I'm like, if you take out Stafford twice and CJ Stroud once, this is the weakest schedule in 15 years. The Atlanta Falcons had this schedule back in no, I think it was 2015. It'd be 10 years. So it's the weakest schedule in a decade. And I'll throw this at you. I said, if I was John Lynch and looked at the schedule, I would sign Brock Purdy now because this schedule screams 12-5, 13-4. And right now he's coming off a losing season. So if you have any leverage, could I say, John, it's the next month to two?
Yeah, I mean, I think we obviously have spent so much time talking about this. His whole thing is comparing himself to other guys. And these recent contracts of guys like Jordan Love, who played 8 games and got 175 million, Tua, who got 160 million, Trevor Lawrence, who got $200 million. Like he does have a leg to stand on, given that he's played well and been a part of a team that was in a Super Bowl. But my issue is like that money's coming. Like he's getting the contract. We don't know exactly 150 million, 180 million, 130 million.
Right.
I'm sure that's you pay him, let's just say conservatively, $50 million a year.
Yeah.
Kyle's one of the highest paid coaches at $15 to $18 million a year. If I'm paying my head coach and my quarterback close to $70 million a year at minimum, I don't care who else is on the team because this roster is not as good as it was a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I need double-digit wins. I mean, we've seen it with
Yeah.
the Rams the last couple of years. They found a way as they retooled. I would say anything less than double-digit wins. I have supported Kyle, thinking like, oh, he's on the hot seat. That was insane talk. But there is a contingent of those humans that exist.
Yeah.
Kyle can rub some people the wrong way. I think he's a pretty elite coach. He's proven that over. But this is a big year for him. I don't need 12, 13 wins. I don't think the roster is quite as good. But if the Ravens or the Bills or the Chiefs had this schedule, we'd be talking like, can they run the table?
Right.
10 wins minimum, I think, is more than fair. And I think that is going to be the expectation, or things have gone really, really sour.
Yeah. I said that if you gave Stafford Burrow, not Burrow because Cincinnati, I don't trust their front office and ownership. But if you gave Josh Allen, Lamar, Mahomes, and I think Stafford and McVay this, we would be talking about 13 or 14 wins. I mean, that's even Vegas would probably put the over under at 12 to 12 and a half. So, I think one of the things that bothered me, John, I've said this, and this is my interpretation. I could tell when Bill Belichick took over drafting with the Patriots. He was drafting players who would plug immediate holes, often reaching for people. General managers tend to have a little bit of a longer vision. I can tell when Pete Carroll in Seattle, I could tell they were reaching on some players, and I'm like, that's not John Snyder. Last couple of drafts when John's controlled them have been excellent. I do feel like the last couple of years, I felt like Kyle's had a lot of say in drafting. I find their drafts for the moment, not for the future. Ricky Pearsall, it's like you've got Jennings and Debo and Ayuk and Kittle and McCaffrey. You've got enough pass catchers. That felt like a coach who wanted wanted to replace Debo. That's what I see. I tend to be able to say, okay, I can tell that's a coach's draft or a coach is putting pressure. I didn't like the Niners draft. I thought they didn't attack the offensive line, which is a huge issue. What did you view of their draft?
I've come to the expectations now. Kyle's admitted like we don't value offensive linemen unless we think you're like an all-time great. We'll pick a skill guy or definitely a defensive lineman, which I'm for, but they just don't draft offensive linemen, especially tackles. He's not going to draft a tackle in the third round, which I think is insane. I had a college scouting director because I was talking a lot about this too during and before the draft, how different personnel departments work. He says you can always tell when the coach is heavily involved because they treat the draft. You can tell they're looking at the depth chart. Scouts and front offices aren't consumed with the depth chart because the depth chart to Kyle is week one against Seattle.
Right.
John Lynch and these like Mykal Williams is a real pick, right? The kid from
Yeah,
Georgia.
that's
That's a
right.
big picture pick that any team takes. That's not the depth chart. Whether you had 10 defensive ends or one, you have no problem picking him. But like you said, Ricky Pearsall, it's like, well, this Ayuk thing's going sour. We're already turning on Debo. We might trade him right now or over the next year. That's a depth chart move. And I think that's where you get into trouble. there's a balance of need and big picture, but coaches are just all Kyle's not worried about 2027. He's worried about this year, trying to win 11 games and be in the playoffs. And I don't blame him, but that's why there's got to be a little separation between church and state. I look at the Eagles, have the most powerful GM. Look how they've drafted, and the coaching staff coach the players. It's gone pretty well.
Yeah, it's so, and I also think there are things. I think Arizona is going to be a real team. I think Seattle's roster is really impressive. I think the Vikings will miss Sam Darnold, and I think the Rams defense. I think it's the best young defense in the NFL. So I thought last year was a year where Arizona and the Rams overachieved. I mean, I thought the Rams overachieved a little. I thought the Arizona wasn't quite there yet with a new coach, and I thought Seattle with Geno Smith had limitations at quarterback. I think the division's much better.
It definitely
So
is.
I, yeah, I mean, so I just don't feel it. The schedule's it's a save. I'll tell you that because you just
I do
you
think
know
this though, Colin. If you go, we do agree Kyle Shanahan has faults at times, is one of the better coaches in the NFL.
yes, yeah,
Listen, Robert Saleh, head coach, Jets, not an easy spot, a little over his head. Most people view him as an excellent defensive coordinator.
yeah.
I don't know. I don't have the spreadsheet because it's not public. I would imagine Kyle and Robert Saleh, when you combine the head coach and defensive coordinator, beside like Andy and Spags, there can't be a higher paid combination. This is a coaching league, right? And because you talk a lot about this, the margins are small. I think you've got to like your chances, even if you got some now random players on the team.
Yeah.
That their offensive and defensive coordinator, the guys calling the plays, are really good. So I'm a little more bullish. Now we're going to find out pretty quickly. Like if they've whiffed on some picks, I don't care if you got Bill Walsh and Belichick in his prime. You can only do this is the NFL. Like you need some of these guys to become players.
So I want to talk about Kansas City. So when you have a dynasty, every dynasty's got a weak spot. Like when New England got into trouble, was near the end of the second dynasty when they just didn't have enough receiver speed, when they couldn't separate. Tom had to play perfect, nobody could get open. The famous sideline shot of him screaming, "Somebody get open." That was the hole in their dynasty. Outside of the Randy Moss years, they weren't electric down the field. It was more tight ends, run game, Tom's efficiency. Tom's 23 for 29. They just don't make mistakes. They beat you late. They were never electric except the Randy Moss years on the perimeter. Kansas City's weakness has been immature wide receivers and offensive line. When they've been blown out, and it's only happened a couple times, both in Super Bowls, they've had left tackle issues or offensive line depth problems. They're just missing good players. So I look at this year. Joe Tooney was their best offensive lineman. He's not a replaceable guy. There's nobody in the draft close. They're now going left tackle for a guy that was a backup in San Francisco. This is, to me, the weakest O-line they've had entering a season. Can they make a move at the trade deadline? Certainly possible. But if you go look at their first 10 games, John, even the bad teams they play, the Giants now have Abdul Carter, Dexter Lawrence, Thibodeau on the other side. The Raiders have Max Crosby. The Broncos, they're better than. Broncos led the NFL in sacks. The Jaguars have a good defensive front. I'm just mentioning the games that look like wins. I looked at Kansas City's schedule early, and I'm like, they could have used some of those games late because it takes a while to create cohesion. You don't replace Joe Tooney in the preseason. Like you need snaps. I thought Kansas City's schedule was about as tough as the league deals to a Andy Reid Mahomes pairing. Sorry to interrupt this great video, but please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you. Now back to the video.
Well, I also think it's easier on players to play, games at noon in Kansas City than they have 5 of their first 8 games are prime time, and they got to go to
Brutal.
Brazil, which I understand the international, especially now with streaming. The Brazil thing, I don't quite get, Colin, going
I
to
don't like
Brazil.
it.
I don't quite
Yeah.
understand that market. But I'll say this about the Chiefs. Their first round draft pick would have been a top 10 pick had he not torn his knee. Well, that's a pretty big red flag, tore his knee. But assuming that he can come back, they did get a very, very talented guy in Josh Simmons that can play left tackle. Now, whether he's ready for the start, whether he goes on pup, time will tell. But that was not just this year, but over the course of the next several years. They might have found their starting left tackle. The BYU kid that ultimately got benched and Tooney had to move to left tackle, I think they plan on moving him to guard. So Andy Reid has a long history of mixing and matching and figuring things out. I know you're high on the Chargers, and I am too. I'm a Jim Harbaugh homer. Of course, they take a running back in the first round that'll end up being like a 1,400-yard rusher by his second year and be a star. But I just can't. And I have been someone, and I know these guys personally. I've bet against them twice now in the last 2 years against the Ravens and the Bills, and that was the playoffs, and I've been burned. We saw last year, everyone was nitpicking them week in, week out. They won every freaking game. Now, the big difference between them and the Patriots is Patriots benefited their division was pretty terrible. Like this
Yeah.
version of the Bills team was not even close. Miami was
Right.
a joke, right?
Yeah.
So their division, this division's really, really hard. I mean, Pete Carroll, if he's the worst, has the worst team in your division, like that's a problem. But I think the Chiefs, we throw the word culture. I think sometimes gets thrown around too liberally. It's real in Kansas City. Like they're winning understanding. And listen, there's going to be a year when they don't make the Super Bowl and they get knocked out in the second round, but it's going to be hard. You're gonna have to knock them out, and I'm picking them to win the division until they don't. Now, this is clearly, I would say, of the last 5 or 6, since the Mahomes era, gonna be the most difficult. But you know, come on, the Giants, Week 3 at Jacksonville, like I get it. Sunday night, Monday night, big moment for those two against Liam Cohen and this Jackson Dart, maybe Russell Wilson. Like I'm just picking the Chiefs in those games.